if you've been pursuing God, if you've been investigating faith, maybe you've been reading the Bible or going to church, you've probably come across this Bible verse that says the wages of sin is death. And I know that's a pretty ominous verse. Certainly if you're new to this, you might say, man, that's kind of brutal. That's kind of hard truth. Like, what exactly does that mean? The wages of sin is death. You know, that verse is talking about the payment. A wage is a payment that you receive for something that you've done. So in other words, the payment of my sin, like when I sin, when I choose to go in my own direction instead of God's direction, when I choose to be selfish, when I choose to sort of act on things just for me and not thinking about other people, not thinking about God and what He wants, the wages of that, like the payment for that, what I've reaped for that is death. What does that even mean? Well, I think it means several things. First of all, I think it's talking about relational death. You know, sin kills relationships. The perfect example of this is my relationship with my wife. You know, I love her. She loves me. We've made a commitment to one another. Well, when I sin against her, when I do things that hurt her, when I do things that are wrong, that just eats away at our relationship. And so my sin has earned relational death. Like it eats away at that relationship. So if I don't turn from that, if I don't admit it, if I don't handle that properly when I make mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes, everyone sins, then it's just going to destroy that relationship. We know so many couples who have destroyed their marriage because of sin on the part of the husband or sin on the part of the wife or both. Sin brings relational death. That's the first thing. But sin also brings emotional death. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when someone has wronged you, like that emotionally, that's difficult. Like that can be very destructive on someone emotionally. You know, an extreme example of this is when parents are abusive to their kids. That's obviously sin. An extreme example of sin, but that's obviously sin. And it wreaks emotional death on the part of those kids. You know, your sin, this is one of those revelations for some people that just really blows them away, but your sin is not just something that hurts you. Your sin is something that can emotionally wreak havoc on someone else. Sin can also bring financial death. You know, sin is expensive. A perfect example of this in society is drunk driving. When somebody drinks and they make the decision to over imbibe and they drink too much, they get drunk. I mean, how many examples are there out there in society, sadly, where, you know, someone wrecks a car or drives into a house or something like that? You know, financially, sin brings death financially. Sin can be so destructive on your finances when you make poor choices, you don't live according to God's way. It can be so destructive on your life financially. Maybe you have some examples of that in your own life. Divorce is a great example. You know, divorce, that relational death that can happen. Divorce can happen because of sin. People don't divorce unless there's problems, and sin is all about problems, right? Bringing problems into your marriage. Well, divorce is one of the most expensive things in the world. Divorce causes debt. Divorce causes people to really sort of have to sell homes, and it wreaks great havoc on a family, on a marriage. Sin brings financial death. Now, obviously, sin can also bring physical death. You know, one of the 10 commandments is do not murder. So when you go against one of the 10 commandments, you're sinning. It's just one example of sin. And it's one of the simplest examples is sin. When someone sins against someone else, we see this in society. One of the ultimate expressions of that is taking another person's life. Sin can bring physical death. This is part of what that verse means, that sin brings death. It's not just relational, emotional, financial. It can even be physical in the extreme. It can be physical death. But really there's one thing that's even more extreme, and that's spiritual death. You know, I think ultimately that's really what the verse is talking about. When that verse says that the wages of sin is death, it's not just talking about relational and emotional and financial and physical. Ultimately, the greatest sort of death and destruction that sin wreaks in our own lives and in the lives of the people around us is spiritual death. The wages of sin is death, which means this: if you don't properly deal with your sin problem, at the end of the day, it's going to bring spiritual death. It's going to destroy you. It's going to destroy your soul. That's why it's so important. This is what Paul's talking about in Romans chapter 6. He's saying it's so important for you to deal with your sin problem. And the only way, according to the Bible, the only way you can deal with your sin problem is through Jesus. When Jesus went to the cross and he died on the cross, having lived a perfect life on earth, Jesus was paying off our sin debt. He was paying off the problem. He was giving us, opening up to us life, which is the opposite of death. If you have never reached out and received this life that Jesus offers, I encourage you to do that. We'll include some links below this where you can talk about how can I accept Christ so that what he did on the cross can pay for my incredible debt of sin, which otherwise would lead to death.